My parents left me a rotting farm in the middle of nowhere, while my brother inherited the $1 million penthouse in San Diego. When his wife called me trash and threw me out into the pouring rain at 4 in the morning, I thought my life was officially over. I had no choice but to sleep on the floor of a dilapidated farmhouse. But when I pushed open the creaky door and stepped on a hidden piece of paper, my blood ran cold. What I found hidden in the floorboards would not only destroy my brother's perfect life, but make me richer and more powerful than he could ever dream. My name is Kiara, and I am 31 years old. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic family members who grossly underestimated your worth. The heavy thud of my vintage leather suitcase hitting the marble floor echoed through the penthouse hallway. The latch burst open, spilling my clothes and my expensive archival tools across the cold stone. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a violent rainstorm battered the San Diego skyline, but the atmosphere inside the room was much colder. I knelt down, trying to gather my belongings, my hands shaking not from fear, but from a rage so deep it threatened to choke me. "You are 31 years old, Kiara, and you are nothing but a glorified librarian." Chloe's shrill voice sliced through the silence of the room. My 32-year-old sister-in-law stood over me, her arms crossed over her designer silk pajamas. Her pale skin was flushed with the thrill of finally kicking me out. "You are a leech. This penthouse belongs to us now. The will has been finalized. Your parents finally realized who the actual adult in this family is, so pick up your useless historical junk and get out of my house." I slowly stood up and looked past her to the kitchen island. My brother DeAndre stood there in a velvet robe, casually sipping a glass of Dom Perignon. He was 35, the undisputed golden child of the family, and currently acting like a king who had just conquered a new territory. He did not look at me with an ounce of pity. His eyes held only annoyance, as if my sudden homelessness was just a minor inconvenience to his late-night drinking schedule. "DeAndre," I said, keeping my voice dangerously low and steady, "I paid the mortgage on this penthouse for the last 6 months while Dad was in the hospital. I paid the medical bills because you were blowing your trust fund on crypto scams and a new Porsche. You know I put every dime I had into keeping this family afloat." DeAndre sighed dramatically, swirling the champagne in his glass. "Listen to my wife, Kiara. Mom and Dad left this place and the family company to me because I actually know how to make money. You chose to study dead people and old pieces of paper. You have absolutely no business sense. The will is completely clear. I need this space to host investors for my new startup. Having my spinster sister moping around the guest room is not good for my brand. You need to go back to where you belong." I stared at the brother I had defended and covered for my entire life. When we were kids, I was the one doing his homework. When he wrecked his first car, I took the blame so he would not lose his baseball scholarship. Our parents had always treated him like a future mogul, brushing his massive failures under the rug while treating my academic achievements like an embarrassing hobby. Suddenly, the sound of breaking glass snapped me out of my thoughts. Chloe had picked up my framed graduation photo from Howard University. She held it with 2 fingers like it was covered in disease, a sickening smirk playing on her lips. She made a theatrical sigh and dropped it flat onto the marble floor. The glass shattered into 100 jagged pieces over my smiling face. "Oops," Chloe said, feigning a gasp. "I guess you will not be needing that in the barn anyway. A master's degree in history. How completely useless. Grab your trash and leave before I call building security." I did not scream. I did not cry. Crying was exactly what they wanted. Instead, I carefully stepped over the broken glass, zipped up my battered suitcase, and reached for the keys to my car sitting on the console table. DeAndre's hand shot out, slamming over mine. He snatched the keys away, slipping them into his pocket. "Those are the keys to the company SUV," he said smoothly. "Mom and Dad left the entire company to me. That means the car is company property. It stays here." "You are stealing my car at 4 in the morning in the middle of a storm," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "I am reclaiming corporate assets," DeAndre corrected with a smug smile. "Call a cab, Kiara. Enjoy the farm." The heavy oak door slammed in my face, the lock clicking shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. I was entirely alone in the dim hallway. I dragged my suitcase to the elevator, the wheels squeaking loudly, matching the pounding ache in my head. Down in the lobby, the night doorman, a kind older man who had known me for years, looked at me with deep sorrow. He offered me a towel to dry my hair and helped me call a taxi, refusing to let me wait outside in the freezing rain. The taxi ride took 4 agonizing hours. We drove north, leaving the glittering lights and obscene wealth of San Diego behind, heading deep into the agricultural heart of California, the Central Valley. As I sat in the back of the cold cab watching the raindrops race across the window, my mind replayed the nightmare of the reading of the will from last week. My parents had structured their final wishes like a final punishment. To their beloved son, DeAndre, they left the lucrative family logistics company and the sprawling luxury penthouse. To their disappointing daughter, Kiara, who stubbornly refused to major in business, they left Grandpa Earl's farm. The lawyer had read it with zero emotion, but the words felt like physical blows. Grandpa Earl was my father's father, a hard-working black man who had purchased a massive plot of land in the valley decades ago. I loved him dearly, and as a child, I used to sit on his porch while he told me stories about the history of the land. But after he passed away 30 years ago, my parents completely abandoned the property. They hated the rural life. They let the farmhouse rot, let the fields overgrow, and completely forgot about it. Now it was my entire inheritance, a useless, barren wasteland. The sky was just beginning to turn a bruised, stormy purple when the taxi finally pulled onto a muddy dirt road. The driver stopped, looking out the window with extreme hesitation. He turned back to me, apologizing that he could not drive any further because the mud would trap his tires. I paid him my last bit of cash, grabbed my suitcase, and stepped out into the freezing sludge. The rain had slowed to a heavy drizzle, but the wind was biting. I stood at the end of the driveway and stared at my new home. It looked like a setting for a horror movie. The farmhouse was severely dilapidated. The roof was sagging in the middle, the porch railings were broken and hanging by rusted nails, and the once white paint was entirely peeled away, leaving rotting gray wood exposed to the elements. The windows were dark and ominous. This was my parents' final message to me. "You are worth nothing." I gritted my teeth, gripping the handle of my suitcase so hard my knuckles turned white. I refused to let DeAndre win. I refused to let Chloe's sneering face be the last thing that defined my life. I dragged my luggage through the thick, sucking mud, my expensive boots ruining with every step. I climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch, holding my breath as the boards groaned ominously under my weight. I reached the front door. The wood was severely swollen from decades of dampness and neglect. There was no key. The lock had rusted entirely away. I pressed my shoulder against the heavy wood and shoved with all my remaining strength. The door shrieked violently on its rusted hinges and gave way, scraping heavily against the floor inside. I stumbled into the dark entryway, coughing as the thick smell of ancient dust, mildew, and abandoned memories hit my lungs. It was freezing inside, perhaps colder than it was out in the rain. I fumbled in my coat pocket for my phone, turning on the flashlight to pierce the gloom. The beam of light revealed peeling floral wallpaper, water-damaged ceilings, and a floor covered in debris. I took a deep breath, preparing to find a clean corner just to sit down and cry. But as I took my second step into the house, my heavy boot pressed down on a floorboard that did not feel right. It was loose. When I shifted my weight, the wooden plank tipped upward like a seesaw. I looked down, shining my phone light at my feet. The warped wooden board had lifted just enough to expose a dark, narrow gap underneath the floor. And sticking out from that dark gap, perfectly preserved and completely dry, was a thick piece of yellowed parchment paper. I froze. The paper looked incredibly old, the edges slightly frayed, but the thick black ink visible on the corner was unmistakable. As a historical archivist, I had spent my entire career handling rare documents. I knew instantly that this was not just a piece of trash left behind by rodents. I knelt down on the dirty floor, ignoring the dampness seeping through my jeans. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached into the gap and gently pinched the edge of the parchment. I carefully pulled it free from the floorboards, wiping away a layer of fine dust. I held the document up to the light of my phone, my eyes scanning the elegant typewritten letters at the top of the page. My heart stopped beating. The air in the freezing room suddenly felt completely still. I read the words again, making sure my exhausted brain was not playing tricks on me. A slow, dangerous smile spread across my face. DeAndre thought he had thrown me out into the trash. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to an absolute empire. The freezing wind howled through the cracks in the rotting wood as I stood alone in the dark. The farmhouse had no electricity. The power company had shut off the grid to this property decades ago, leaving me with nothing but the fading flashlight on my phone. The rain was merciless. It battered the sagging roof, and soon icy drops began to leak through the ceiling, splashing onto the debris-covered floor. I shivered, pulling my damp coat tighter around my shoulders. I needed to find a dry corner just to survive the night. As I navigated through the main hallway, sweeping my phone light across the ruins of my grandfather's life, I noticed an old wooden bookcase leaning heavily against the parlor wall. Several thick leather-bound books were still stacked on the bottom shelves, completely exposed to the water dripping from above. My instincts as a historical archivist immediately kicked in. I could not stand by and watch history be destroyed. I rushed over, ignoring my own exhaustion and the freezing temperature. I carefully pulled the books from the shelves, brushing off decades of dust. They were classic literature first editions of authors my grandfather had admired. I spent the next 2 hours moving them to the driest spot in the house, an old cast-iron bathtub in the center of the bathroom that was miraculously free of leaks. By the time I finished, my hands were numb and my clothes were soaked through. I dragged my vintage leather suitcase into what used to be Grandpa Earl's master bedroom. The air in here was thick with the smell of wet earth and decaying wood. I sat on the edge of my suitcase, wrapping my arms around my knees, trying to preserve whatever body heat I had left. The storm outside was escalating into a violent tempest. Thunder shook the very foundations of the fragile farmhouse. I closed my eyes, the memory of Chloe's sneering face and DeAndre's arrogant smirk flashing in my mind. They were probably asleep in their warm $1 million penthouse right now, laughing at how easily they had discarded me. The rage burning inside my chest was the only thing keeping me warm. Suddenly, a blinding flash of lightning illuminated the entire room, turning the night into stark, terrifying daylight. Less than a second later, a deafening crack echoed through the air so loud it felt like an explosion right next to my ear. The massive ancient oak tree standing just outside the bedroom window had been struck directly. I screamed and threw my arms over my head as the giant tree splintered and collapsed. Its massive branches crashed violently through the sagging roof and slammed into the bedroom wall. The impact was catastrophic. The entire farmhouse shuddered violently. Drywall, wooden beams, and decades of accumulated dirt rained down around me in a suffocating cloud of debris. I coughed uncontrollably, waving my hands to clear the dust. The wind was now roaring directly into the bedroom through the gaping hole in the roof. I grabbed my phone, shining the light toward the destruction to see if the structure was going to collapse completely. The wall facing the window had been completely obliterated. But as the dust began to settle, I noticed something strange. The drywall had not just broken away to reveal the outside elements, it had shattered to reveal another layer behind it. I stepped closer, my boots crunching over the broken plaster. Behind the facade of the ordinary bedroom wall was a secondary structure. It was a narrow, hidden alcove framed with heavy steel-reinforced beams that had easily withstood the impact of the falling tree. It was a panic room built in secret by a man who had grown up in an era where a successful black man needed a place to hide his most valuable assets from those who would try to take them. My breath caught in my throat. I squeezed through the jagged opening of the broken drywall and stepped into the hidden space. The air inside was completely dry, perfectly preserved from the damp decay of the rest of the house. In the center of the small room sat a heavy antique iron trunk. It was locked with a thick brass padlock, but the metal was old and brittle. I grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker I had seen near the living room door and brought it down hard on the lock. It took 3 massive strikes fueled by all the anger and betrayal of the past 24 hours before the rusted mechanism finally snapped open. I dropped the poker and knelt beside the trunk. My hands were shaking wildly as I lifted the heavy iron lid. I did not know what to expect. Money-gold old photographs. When I shined my phone light inside, I did not find stacks of cash. Instead, I found something far more valuable to someone with my specific expertise. The trunk was lined with acid-free archival paper, a technique used only by professionals to preserve delicate documents. Carefully nested inside were several thick folders. I opened the first folder and gasped out loud. It contained handwritten manuscripts completely pristine and untouched by time. I recognized the handwriting instantly from my years of studying mid-century literature. These were original unpublished drafts, written by James Baldwin and Maya Angelou, personal letters sent directly to Grandpa Earl. To any ordinary person, it was just old paper. To an archivist, and to the high-end auction houses in New York, this was an absolute treasure trove worth millions of dollars. But that was not all. Beneath the literary goldmine was a single thick envelope made of heavy parchment. I carefully opened it and slid out a legal document bound in dark brown leather. The gold foil lettering on the front cover was still bright and clear. I traced the letters with my finger, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. It read, Independent Groundwater Rights Certificate. My eyes widened in pure shock. I quickly opened the document and scanned the legal jargon. In the state of California, land and water were 2 entirely different commodities. When my parents abandoned this farm, they only saw the barren dirt on the surface. But Grandpa Earl had been a visionary. Decades ago, he had legally separated the water rights from the surface property rights. He owned the massive subterranean aquifer flowing deep beneath this valley. The document clearly stated that the owner of this certificate held absolute exclusive control over the millions of gallons of water beneath the entire acreage. In modern California, where tech companies desperately needed massive amounts of water to cool their gigantic data centers, this piece of paper was not just valuable, it was the ultimate leverage. It was power. DeAndre had inherited a logistics company drowning in hidden debt and a penthouse he could barely afford. I had inherited the very resource that the modern world could not function without. I was not holding a piece of history. I was holding a loaded gun aimed directly at the people who had tried to destroy me. I let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. The universe had a wicked sense of humor. I carefully placed the documents back into the trunk, my mind racing with 1,000 different strategies. The scared, discarded sister, who had been thrown out into the rain, was dead. She had been crushed under the weight of that falling tree. The woman standing in this hidden room was someone entirely different. Just as I closed the iron lid, the silence of the room was shattered by a sharp, vibrating buzz. My phone lit up in the darkness. The bright screen displayed a name I never expected to see so soon. DeAndre. He was calling me. Not even 24 hours after having his wife throw me out like garbage, my brother was calling. I stared at the glowing screen, the leather-bound certificate resting safely near my feet. A slow, chilling smile crept across my face. Let the games begin. I swiped the green button on the cracked screen of my phone and brought the device to my ear. I did not say hello. I just listened to the hollow static on the other end, waiting for him to make the first move. Kiara. Hey, are you settled in, okay? The fake sweetness in his voice was thick enough to choke on. Not even 24 hours ago, he was standing in a velvet robe drinking expensive champagne and watching his wife throw my belongings into the freezing mud. Now he sounded like a deeply concerned older brother, just checking in on his helpless little sister. The sheer audacity of his tone made my stomach turn, but I forced my breathing to remain steady. "What do you want, DeAndre?" I kept my voice completely flat, devoid of the panic or despair he was undoubtedly hoping to hear. He chuckled a low, patronizing sound that used to make me feel incredibly small when we were kids. "Look, I know things got a little heated last night. Chloe was stressed about the investors coming over, and you know how she gets when her space is violated. But I have been thinking about your situation all day. I genuinely feel bad about you being stuck out there in the middle of nowhere. It is not safe for a woman alone in a house that is falling apart." I gripped the leather-bound water rights certificate in my free hand, the gold lettering pressing into my palm. "You feel bad. That is fascinating. You did not feel bad when Mom and Dad drained my entire college savings account to pay off your $50,000 poker debt in Vegas." There was a sharp, irritated exhale on the other end of the line. "We are not doing this again, Kiara. I was the heir to the family logistics company. I was the hope of this entire family. My networking in Vegas was an investment in our corporate future. You were sitting in a library studying dead presidents and old pieces of paper. The family made a strategic financial decision to protect its greatest asset, which was me. You need to grow up and let that go." I closed my eyes, letting the familiar sting of his gaslighting wash over me. It was the same narrative our parents had spun for years. DeAndre was the golden child allowed to make massive, expensive mistakes because he was destined for greatness. I was the scapegoat expected to sacrifice my future to pave his runway. I worked 2 jobs in the campus dining hall just to afford my textbooks, while he drove a brand new BMW paid for by the family trust. Anyway, he continued, his tone shifting back to that sickeningly sweet cadence. "I am calling because I actually found a way to help you out of this mess. I made a few calls today. I have a buddy, a real estate developer who operates out of Fresno. He is looking for some cheap remote land to build a couple of industrial storage units. I told him about Grandpa Earl's old farm, and he is willing to do me a massive favor. He will take the property off your hands for $50,000. $50,000. The number hung in the damp air of the ruined farmhouse. "It is a straight cash offer," Kiara DeAndre pressed, sensing my silence. "No inspections, no waiting for mortgage approvals. You can finally pay off those student loans you are always complaining about. You can get a tiny apartment in the city and get back on your feet. You do not belong on a farm. You are a city girl. Just let me handle this for you." He was trying to rob me blind while demanding I thank him for it. If I had not just smashed open a hidden panic room, I might have believed him. I might have cried tears of gratitude and signed my inheritance away just to escape the leaking roof and the cold. But I had the certificate. I knew the land was hiding something, and DeAndre's sudden urgency proved it. 50,000, I repeated slowly, projecting an aura of naive hesitation. "For 50 acres of land. That seems a bit low, even for a dilapidated property." "It is barren dirt." "Kiara?" His voice cracked slightly, a brief flash of the desperate greed hiding beneath his calm facade. "The house is completely unlivable. The soil is dead. You are incredibly lucky I found someone willing to pay that much. Do not ruin this by being stubborn. I will have the company lawyer draft the transfer papers and email them to you tonight. Just sign them digitally, and I will wire you the cash by tomorrow afternoon. Do not overthink this. You are completely out of your depth here. Let the adults handle the business. Send me the paperwork," I said softly. "I will think about it." Before he could argue or push for an immediate commitment, I pulled the phone away from my ear and ended the call. The silence of the panic room rushed back in, broken only by the steady dripping of rain from the collapsed roof outside. I immediately turned on my phone's mobile hotspot. My hands were moving with frantic, practiced precision as I pulled my laptop from my waterproof messenger bag. The battery was sitting at 42%. It was more than enough time for a professional archivist to dig up the truth. I sat cross-legged on the dusty floor, the bright glow of the screen illuminating the dark hidden room in a harsh blue light. If DeAndre had a cash buyer ready overnight, it meant this deal was already in motion long before our parents even passed away. He had been planning to steal this land from me the second the will was read. I opened a secure browser and started digging into public records. I bypassed the standard search engines and went straight into the county zoning and planning databases. I searched for any inquiries or permits filed under our family name, the logistics company, or DeAndre's personal LLCs within the last 6 months. Nothing came up under his name. He was arrogant, but he was not entirely stupid. He would use a proxy. I switched my tactics. I searched the specific geographic coordinates of the farm, pulling up the environmental impact reports and land survey requests for the surrounding 5 square miles. My fingers flew across the keyboard, cross-referencing tax records and corporate filings. It took me exactly 14 minutes to find the anomaly. 2 months ago, a massive zoning inquiry had been filed for my exact parcel of land requesting approval for heavy industrial electrical grid access. It was filed by a shell corporation called Blue Horizon Holdings. I copied the Shell Corporation's tax identification number and ran it through a federal corporate registry database. I traced the money, following the paper trail through 2 more dummy corporations, until the true parent company finally appeared on my screen. I stared at the logo loading on my laptop. My breath caught in my throat. Apex Data Solutions. They were not a small-time real estate developer. They were one of the largest global tech conglomerates in the world. They were definitely not building cheap storage units. A company like Apex only requested heavy industrial electrical grids for one reason. They were planning to build a hyperscale data center, a massive multi-building campus to house millions of cloud servers. But hyperscale data centers generate an unimaginable amount of heat. They require millions of gallons of cold water every single day just to keep their server farms from melting down. Central California was notorious for its severe droughts and strict water regulations. Apex could not just build a facility anywhere. They desperately needed land that came with unrestricted independent groundwater access. They needed the subterranean ocean sitting directly beneath my boots. I looked down at the leather-bound certificate resting on my lap. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. DeAndre had known. He had discovered the tech company's interest in the land, but he knew the will gave the farm to me. He thought the farm only consisted of dead dirt and a rotting house. He thought he could buy me out for pocket change, turn around, and sell the land to Apex for a massive corporate payout. The 50 acres of land on the surface were essentially worthless. But with the exclusive water rights I now held in my hands, this property was not worth $50,000. It was easily worth $20 or $30 million to a desperate tech giant. DeAndre was trying to steal $30 million from me to fund his lavish lifestyle while telling me I should be grateful for the scraps he tossed my way. I slowly closed my laptop. The blue light vanished, plunging me back into the shadows of the panic room. I was sitting in a ruined house wearing damp clothes with exactly $400 to my name, but I was holding the absolute destruction of my brother's entire world. He wanted to play business. He wanted to treat me like a foolish little girl who only knew how to read old paper. It was time to show my golden child brother exactly what a master archivist could do with the right piece of paper. The morning sun broke through the heavy rain clouds, casting a cold, pale light across the ruined landscape of the farm. I had not slept a single second. I spent the remaining hours of the night meticulously wrapping the water rights certificate and the priceless literary manuscripts in multiple layers of heavy-duty plastic to protect them from the damp air. I secured them inside my waterproof messenger bag, keeping it strapped across my chest. My body was exhausted, but my mind was operating with a razor-sharp clarity I had never experienced before. Just before 9 o'clock, the quiet isolation of the valley was shattered by the deep, aggressive roar of a high-performance engine. I stood up from the cast-iron bathtub where I had been sitting and walked over to the shattered window. A pristine, blindingly white Mercedes G-Wagon was rolling up the muddy driveway, its massive tires tearing deep, ugly trenches into the soft earth. The luxury SUV looked absurdly out of place against the backdrop of the rotting farmhouse and overgrown weeds. The engine cut off and the heavy driver's side door swung open. Chloe stepped out into the mud. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere sweater, tight designer jeans, and a pair of suede ankle boots that probably cost more than my first car. She looked around the property with an expression of profound disgust, her nose literally wrinkling as the smell of wet earth and decaying wood hit her. Then she reached into the back seat and pulled out a charming little wicker basket covered with a checkered cloth. I walked out the front door and stood on the sagging wooden porch looking down at my sister-in-law. My clothes were damp and covered in dust from the collapsed wall, my hair was a messy knot, and I had dark circles under my eyes. To Chloe, I probably looked perfectly defeated, a tragic charity case waiting to be rescued. Kiara, oh my goodness, look at you. Chloe's voice was pitched artificially high, dripping with a syrupy sweetness that made my skin crawl. She carefully navigated the mud, trying to protect her suede boots, and walked up to the edge of the porch. She did not wait for an invitation. She stepped up and threw her arms around my stiff, unyielding shoulders, pulling me into a forceful hug that smelled of expensive floral perfume and stale lies. "I am so incredibly sorry about last night," she cooed, pulling back and looking at me with wide, fake, sympathetic eyes. DeAndre was completely out of line. He had been drinking that champagne all evening, and the stress of taking over the family logistics company is just eating him alive. You know how men get when they are under that kind of corporate pressure. They lash out at the people they love the most. I told him this morning that throwing you out was unacceptable, no matter how difficult you were being about the will. I did not blink. I just stared at her, letting her fill the silence with her rehearsed performance. "I brought you some organic blueberry muffins," she continued, holding up the wicker basket like a peace offering to a hostile native. "They are from that little bakery in La Jolla you always used to point out, but could never afford. I thought you might need something comforting after sleeping in this horrible place. Kiara, this house is literally falling apart. It is completely unsafe for a single woman, especially with the kind of people who wander around these rural areas." "Thank you for the muffins, Chloe," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "Why are you really here?" "DeAndre already called me last night to offer me $50,000 for the farm. Did he send you to secure the signature because he was too cowardly to look me in the eye today?" Chloe let out a breathy, dismissive laugh, waving her manicured hand in the air. "Oh, ignore DeAndre. He is a brilliant businessman, but he has no emotional intelligence whatsoever. 50,000 is an absolute insult, and I told him so. We are family, Kiara. We are not going to leave you destitute." She took a step closer, her voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper, as if we were two girlfriends sharing a deep secret. "DeAndre and I talked extensively this morning. We know you have student loans. We know you make barely enough to survive working in those dusty library archives. We want to see you thrive, Kiara. So we are doubling the offer. We are willing to give you $100,000 in clean, untraceable cash. You sign the deed over to DeAndre's holding company today, and the money will be in your bank account by dinner time. You can move back to the city, get a beautiful little apartment, and never have to look at this depressing swamp ever again." She smiled, a wide, triumphant expression. She genuinely believed she had just presented me with an irresistible lottery ticket. She thought $100,000 would blind me to the millions she and DeAndre were secretly planning to make from Apex Data Solutions. I looked down at the wicker basket, then back up to her perfectly contoured face. $100,000, I repeated slowly, letting the number hang in the cold morning air. "That is very generous of you, Chloe. But you know, spending the night here really changed my perspective. The fresh air, the quiet. I think I am going to keep Grandpa Earl's farm. I am not interested in selling. Not to DeAndre and not to his imaginary real estate developer friend." The silence that followed was absolute. A cold gust of wind swept across the porch, rustling the dead leaves in the yard. Chloe's fake sympathetic smile did not just fade. It vanished entirely, replaced by a cold, hard sneer that completely transformed her face. Her posture stiffened, and the sweet, high-pitched tone of her voice dropped into a vicious, grating snarl. "Do not play games with me, you arrogant little bitch!" The sudden shift in her demeanor was violently abrupt, but I did not flinch. I had been waiting for the mask to slip. "You listen to me," Chloe hissed, pointing a perfectly manicured finger directly at my chest. "You are a bitter, jealous woman who has spent her entire life resenting her brother's success. You think you are so smart with your little history books, but you know absolutely nothing about the real world. DeAndre needs this land to secure his future. You are going to sign that property over, or we are going to destroy you." "Destroy me?" I asked, tilting my head slightly, allowing a faint, mocking smile to touch the corners of my mouth. "Over a piece of barren dirt." "That seems like an extreme reaction, Chloe. It is not just dirt, and you know it." She caught herself, her eyes narrowing as she realized she had almost said too much. "We have the most expensive corporate lawyers in the state of California on our payroll. If you do not sign those papers today, DeAndre is going to file a lawsuit against you for fraudulent inducement. We will claim you manipulated your parents in their final days. We will file for a conservatorship and tell a judge you are mentally unstable. We will tie this worthless farm up in probate litigation for the next 10 years. She took a step back, looking me up and down with absolute contempt. "You have no money, Kiara. You cannot afford to fight us in court. We will drain every single penny you have. We will ruin your professional reputation, and when we are done, the bank will seize this property anyway to pay your legal fees. You will end up on the street with absolutely nothing. Take the $100,000 and walk away, or I promise you we will make you wish you had never been born." She shoved the basket of organic muffins hard against my chest. I did not raise my hands to catch it. I let the basket hit my jacket and fall to the wooden floorboards, the expensive pastries spilling out into the dirt and debris. Chloe sneered at the mess, turned on her heel, and marched back to her G-Wagon. She did not bother avoiding the mud this time. She climbed into the driver's seat, slammed the heavy door shut, and gunned the engine. The massive tires spun aggressively, spraying wet earth across the overgrown lawn as she sped back down the driveway, desperate to return to her world of luxury and deceit. I stood on the porch and watched the white vehicle disappear down the road until the sound of the engine was completely gone. The threat of legal ruin hung in the air, but I did not feel an ounce of fear. If they wanted a war of attrition, they had picked a fight with the wrong woman. They thought I was broke. They thought my historical junk was worthless. I reached inside my coat and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I had memorized years ago. The phone rang twice before a crisp professional voice answered on the other end. "Simone," I said, my voice steady and commanding. "Kiara, my God, where have you been?" my best friend replied. The tone of her voice was laced with worry. "I have been trying to reach you since the funeral. Are you okay?" "I am better than okay, Simone. I need a massive favor, and I need it done with absolute discretion. You are still the senior appraiser at Sotheby's auction house in New York, right?" "Of course I am," Simone answered, her professional curiosity instantly sparked. "What do you have, Kiara?" I took a deep breath, looking back at the broken wall of the farmhouse. "I have Grandpa Earl's private collection. I am holding perfectly preserved, unpublished original manuscripts and personal letters handwritten by James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. They are authenticated, they have never been seen by the public, and they belong entirely to me." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Simone knew exactly what those names meant. She knew the historical and financial weight of what I was holding. "Kiara, if what you are saying is true, those documents could shake the entire American literary world to its core. Collectors will go to war over them." "Good," I replied, my eyes hardening into a cold, determined stare. "Because I need capital, and I need it by the end of the week. Prepare a private, expedited auction for your most elite buyers. We are going to bleed the billionaires dry." 48 hours later, I quietly left the farm carrying the waterproof bag that held my grandfather's priceless legacy. I took a red-eye flight from a small regional airport straight to New York, completely disappearing from my family's radar. When I stepped into the luxurious and discreet office building of Sotheby's auction house in Manhattan, Simone was already waiting at the door. My best friend had worked tirelessly over the past 2 days to assemble a small group of the world's most elite private art collectors. They were anonymous billionaires, powerful scholars, people who truly understood the unparalleled historical value of handwritten letters from James Baldwin and Maya Angelou. The auction took place in a highly secured closed room. There was no press, no media, no information leaked to the outside world. I sat in the corner of the room, sipping mineral water, quietly watching the numbers steadily climb on the electronic screen. Every time the auctioneer spoke, the value of the documents skyrocketed. When the gavel struck for the final time to close the sale, everything in my life officially changed. I was no longer the destitute archival assistant my family constantly belittled and trampled on. I walked out of that massive building with $2.5 million in cash, transferred directly into a secure private bank account. With a massive amount of capital in my hands, the first thing I did was not buy designer clothes or go on a luxury vacation. I needed a sharp weapon to deal with DeAndre's formidable legal team. I immediately called Marcus. Marcus was not just an ordinary real estate lawyer. He was the most ruthless and intelligent shark in the California legal world, a self-made black man who built his empire from nothing. Marcus was famous for tearing massive corporations apart in the courtroom and never backing down from people who used money to bully others. I scheduled an appointment at his office, paying a massive retainer fee up front to secure his services, and placed the entire file regarding the water rights certificate on his desk. When Marcus finished reading the gold foil lettering on the parchment, he slowly looked up at me. A cold, calculating smile spread across the veteran lawyer's face. He told me that DeAndre had absolutely no idea who he was messing with. Marcus promised me that we would not only protect this farm from their clutches, but we would use the law itself to strip away everything my brother was desperately trying to build. I entrusted the entire legal battlefront to Marcus and immediately flew back to California. But the moment my rental car turned onto the dirt road leading to the farm, I instantly realized something was wrong. The quiet isolation of the valley had been shattered. The heavy steel padlock I had carefully secured on the iron gate before leaving had been destroyed. It was snapped completely in half by industrial bolt cutters and tossed carelessly onto the dying yellow grass. Deep tire tracks from a heavy truck were carved into the dried mud, leading all the way from the road into the front yard. I stepped out of the car, my heart pounding heavily in my chest. But it was not fear. It was a cold, surging fury. Right in the middle of the front yard, blocking the path to the wooden house, a large wooden sign had been driven deep into the ground. Painted on it in bright, threatening red letters were the words, "Disputed property. Do not enter." This was DeAndre's filthy psychological warfare. He had sent thugs to vandalize the property while I was away. He wanted me to return home, see this, and feel profoundly threatened. He wanted me to believe he held absolute power, that he could send criminals to harass me at any moment, and that I was completely unsafe in my own grandfather's home. He hoped the fear and isolation would force me to break down, pick up the phone, and humiliatingly beg for the cheap $100,000 Chloe had offered. I walked right up to the sign, gripped the rough wooden post with both hands, and pulled it out of the ground with every ounce of strength I had. I threw the shattered sign violently into the trash pile by the porch. His cheap psychological games might have worked on the passive sister I used to be, but they were completely useless against a woman who now held millions of dollars and genuine power. Just as I stepped through the dilapidated wooden door and into the house, my phone buzzed frantically. It was Marcus. His voice echoed through the speaker, deep, sharp, and carrying an unmistakable tone of triumph. "Kiara, I just had my investigators dig deep into your brother's entire financial portfolio," Marcus said, his words fast and urgent. "What I found is even worse and more pathetic than we initially predicted. DeAndre is standing on the absolute brink of total bankruptcy." I frowned, walking over to the window to look out at the torn-up yard, trying to process the information. Bankruptcy? But that made no sense. Our parents had just passed away and left him a highly profitable logistics company and a multi-million-dollar penthouse in downtown San Diego. How could he possibly go bankrupt so quickly? It is true he inherited everything, Marcus replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. But you forgot that in order to keep up appearances and win the attention of the tech giant Apex, he had to prove he was a businessman with massive cash reserves. He spent money recklessly. He poured cash into brand new supercars, extravagant dinners to entertain clients, and expensive designer goods for his wife Chloe, all just to blind the investors. When the family company did not generate enough liquid cash to throw into that bottomless pit, he made an incredibly stupid and fatal move. He quietly mortgaged the penthouse and his entire stake in the family company to an underground loan shark just to get revolving cash. I held my breath, hanging on to every word Marcus said. Now those exorbitant interest rates are eating him alive every single day, Marcus continued. He is desperately running out of money. Do you understand what this means, Kiara? He is not forcing you to sell this land to Apex to get richer. He is doing it to save his own life before those loan sharks come knocking and seize every single asset he has. He is completely cornered. I stood frozen, my eyes locked on the empty space in front of me. Suddenly, everything became perfectly clear and logical. Chloe's extreme arrogance, DeAndre's gangster-style threats, the frantic rush to close the land deal immediately. It was all just a pathetic shell hiding his absolute terrifying panic. The golden child of the family, the one our parents always praised as a business genius, was actually just a pathetic fraud, digging his own grave. He did not just want to steal my land. He genuinely needed it just to keep breathing. And ironically, I, the sister he threw out into the street at 4 a.m, was now holding his one and only lifeline. I smiled a cold, ruthless smile that had never graced the face of the rejected daughter before. Get all the legal paperwork ready, Marcus, I said, my voice sharp as a razor ringing clearly in the empty house. It is time to tighten the noose. That Sunday morning, I decided to make an appearance at our community's central church. This was the exact place where my parents had spent decades buying respect with massive donation checks and carefully constructed public personas. The air inside the grand lobby was filled with the lingering echoes of the choir and the overlapping chatter of wealthy families socializing after the main service. I wore a simple, unbranded gray dress, my hair pulled back into a neat knot. As I walked through the heavy oak doors, the sunlight caught the stained glass windows, throwing colorful patterns across the polished marble floor. The scent of burning wax and expensive perfumes mixed together in a familiar way. But I was not there to find spiritual peace. I was there to tighten the noose around the people who had tried to destroy me. It did not take long to find them. DeAndre and Chloe were holding court right in the center of the lobby, completely surrounded by my parents' old friends and a gaggle of nosy aunties. DeAndre was wearing a custom-tailored suit that probably cost more than my first car, a diamond-encrusted Rolex flashing on his wrist every time he gestured. He was speaking loudly, bragging to anyone who would listen about a massive multi-million-dollar tech development deal he was about to close. Chloe stood right beside him, her arm looped possessively through his, occasionally flipping her hair just to make sure the ceiling lights caught the massive diamond on her wedding ring. They were playing the roles of the perfect, successful power couple flawlessly. Aunt Shirley, a woman who had always treated DeAndre like a flawless prince, was nodding along with absolute adoration. You are making this entire family so incredibly proud, DeAndre, she gushed loudly. Your parents are definitely smiling down from heaven right now. A massive tech project in the valley is going to change everything. We always knew you were the genius of the family. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the small crowd, feeding DeAndre's bloated ego. He took a sip from his coffee, puffing out his chest like a king surveying his loyal subjects. I quietly made my way toward the refreshment table, taking my time completely unbothered by their grand performance. But Chloe had the predatory instincts of a vulture. She sensed my presence almost immediately. She snapped her head in my direction, and the fake plastic smile on her face instantly froze. The atmosphere in the lobby shifted as people followed her gaze and realized the disgraced homeless daughter had dared to show her face. Instead of ignoring me or pretending I did not exist, Chloe decided to go for the public kill. She genuinely believed that humiliating me in front of the entire congregation would solidify her dominance and crush whatever little spirit I had left. She grabbed a plastic cup filled to the brim with dark purple grape juice, pushed her way through the crowd of aunties, and marched directly toward me with her chin held high. "Well, look who decided to crawl out of the mud!" Chloe's shrill voice sliced through the lobby intentionally loud enough to make everyone stop talking and stare. She took one final step toward me and intentionally stumbled. She shoved her arm forward, throwing the entire cup of dark grape juice directly at my chest. The freezing liquid splashed violently against me, instantly blooming into an ugly dark purple stain across the front of my light gray dress. It looked like a massive bleeding wound. Several people in the crowd gasped in shock, but absolutely no one stepped forward to help me. "Oops," Chloe said, covering her mouth with her hand in a gesture of exaggerated mocking surprise. Her eyes were gleaming with pure malice. "I am so sorry, Kiara. I just tripped." But honestly, it is not like that cheap rag of a dress was worth anything to begin with. "I cannot believe you actually had the nerve to bring your dirty homeless act into this church. Have you no shame at all? You are an absolute embarrassment to your parents' legacy. They are probably crying in heaven right now, seeing their daughter living like a feral animal in a barn instead of accepting the generous charity your brother offered you." The whispers in the lobby grew louder. The older women shook their heads, casting looks of deep pity and disgust in my direction. They were so used to the narrative that I was the family failure. From across the room, DeAndre stood with his arms crossed, a sickening smirk plastered on his face. He made absolutely no move to reprimand his wife. He was waiting for the inevitable breakdown. He wanted me to burst into tears, cover my face in shame, and run out of the church doors so he could tell everyone I was mentally unstable. But I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not give them the satisfying reaction they were so desperately waiting for. The burning anger inside me had calcified into something entirely cold and precise. I calmly reached over to the refreshment table, pulled a pristine white paper napkin from the dispenser, and gently dabbed at the wet stain on my dress. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of someone enjoying a peaceful afternoon tea. My complete lack of panic caused a ripple of confusion through the crowd. Chloe's triumphant smile faltered slightly, her brow furrowing as she realized her public execution was not going according to plan. I tossed the stained napkin into the trash bin, raised my head, and looked directly into her arrogant eyes. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. I took one deliberate step forward, completely erasing the personal space between us. The crowd held its collective breath, expecting me to slap her across her perfectly contoured face. But I did not raise my hand. Instead, I leaned in close, bringing my lips just inches from her ear. "Careful, sister-in-law," I whispered. My voice was incredibly soft, smooth as silk, but sharp enough to draw blood. I made absolutely sure that she was the only one who could hear the words leaving my mouth. A 25% monthly interest rate to underground loan sharks cannot be paid off with spilled grape juice. Those men do not have my patience, Chloe. They will walk right past the doorman at your fancy penthouse, and they will gladly chop off those perfectly manicured fingers just to take that diamond ring if your husband does not have their cash. Do not worry about my dress. Worry about keeping yourself alive. Chloe's entire body violently jolted as if I had just injected a lethal dose of poison directly into her veins. The arrogant flush vanished from her cheeks, leaving her skin a sickly, terrifying shade of pale white. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers, the pupils trembling with absolute, unadulterated terror. The deepest, darkest secret her husband had been hiding, the terrifying reality of the criminal debt hanging over their heads, had just been dragged into the light. The empty plastic cup slipped from her shaking fingers, bouncing off the marble floor. She opened her mouth to speak, to scream, to deny it, but her throat simply stopped working. She was paralyzed by fear, staring at me like I was a monster she had accidentally summoned from the dark. I did not need to hear her response. The absolute horror painted across her face was the greatest reward I could have ever asked for. I slowly leaned back, maintaining my calm, freezing smile, and stepped around her. The crowd automatically parted from me, stepping aside as if I possessed some invisible, terrifying aura that commanded immediate respect. The gossiping whispers instantly shifted away from me and focused entirely on Chloe's bizarre, frozen reaction. DeAndre frowned, his smug expression dropping as he rushed over to grab his wife by the shoulders, demanding to know what was wrong with her. Before I walked out the main doors, I stopped at the grand offering table near the entrance. This was the exact spot where my parents used to drop their checks to buy their golden reputation. I calmly opened my waterproof messenger bag and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. I placed it neatly on the velvet cloth right next to the donation box. Written across the front in thick, bold black marker was a single name: DeAndre. Inside that envelope was not a signed property deed. It was not a plea for family reconciliation. It was an official, legally binding restraining order signed and stamped by a California Superior Court judge, executed by Marcus just yesterday. It legally barred DeAndre from coming within 500 feet of the farm. If he even stepped a single toe onto my property line, he would be immediately arrested and thrown in a jail cell for criminal trespassing and harassment. I flipped my hair over my shoulder, pushed open the heavy wooden doors, and stepped out into the brilliant Sunday sunlight. The morning air had never tasted so incredibly sweet. Their pathetic psychological games were officially over. The countdown to their absolute destruction had just begun. I walked to my rental car with a light heart, wondering exactly how the golden child was going to explain to Apex Data Solutions and a gang of ruthless loan sharks that he was legally banned from stepping foot on the only piece of land that could save his miserable life. I sat back in the premium leather chair inside Marcus's high-end law office. The warm light from the chandelier above cast sharp, dramatic shadows across the room, reflecting the hard truth of my new reality. There was no more weakness left in me. There was no more fear. After a lifetime of being trampled on and dismissed by my own flesh and blood, I had finally learned how to forge my pain into a weapon of absolute quiet destruction. The psychological warfare at the church was merely the prelude. Now I was going to use the exact weapons my brother worshipped to bring him to his knees. I was going to use legal power and corporate money. According to the private investigators Marcus had hired, DeAndre was in a state of absolute frantic agitation. Receiving a legal restraining order from a judge was a massive blow to his fragile ego. He was completely accustomed to controlling every narrative and forcing everyone in our family to back down whenever he threw a tantrum. He could not accept the reality that the nerdy, useless little sister he had thrown out onto the street was now using the legal system to bind his hands. But his arrogant anger quickly morphed into sheer, unadulterated terror when he fully realized the implications. Being legally banned from stepping foot on the farm meant he had lost all physical control over the project site. In a state of desperate panic, DeAndre decided to make an incredibly reckless move. He ignored the reality of the inheritance and the restraining order entirely. First thing Monday morning, he put on his most expensive designer suit, grabbed a thick leather briefcase full of documents, and drove straight to the gleaming glass headquarters of Apex Data Solutions. Operating under the guise that he was the sole executor of the family company and the rightful manager of the estate, he attempted to force the Apex Board of Directors to sign the surface land purchase agreement immediately. He used every slick, silver-tongued sales tactic he knew, painting a glorious picture of a long-term corporate partnership. He was so desperate for that initial deposit check that his usual cool demeanor began to crack. He needed that corporate money wired into his account that very afternoon, just to fill the massive financial hole the underground loan sharks were digging under him. But my brother had no idea that across town Marcus and I were calmly preparing to pull the trigger. Marcus took a slow sip of his black coffee, his fingers tapping a rhythmic, confident beat on his solid oak desk. Unlike DeAndre's loud and frantic scrambling, our approach was methodical, surgical, and devastatingly precise. We did not need to show up at a corporate office and cause a desperate scene. Our weapon of choice was a highly polite, legally binding electronic mail sent directly to the inbox of the chairman of the Apex board, the chief financial officer, and the entire corporate legal team. The subject line of the email was only a few words long, but it carried the weight of a nuclear bomb. Legal notice. Regarding independent groundwater rights in the Central Valley sector. The body of the email was drafted by Marcus, using the sharpest, most undeniable legal terminology available in the state of California. We attached a high-resolution digital scan of the leather-bound water rights certificate Grandpa Earl had hidden away decades ago. Marcus brilliantly and politely explained to the Apex executives that purchasing the surface land from DeAndre was a completely meaningless transaction. Without access to the massive subterranean aquifer required to cool their hyperscale server farms, the land DeAndre was trying to sell them was nothing more than a barren, useless desert. The legal notice explicitly stated that I, Kiara, the sole legal owner of the water rights, had absolutely zero intention of cooperating, partnering, or leasing the water access to DeAndre or any entity associated with him. The letter concluded with a gentle warning. If Apex proceeded with the transaction, they would be entangled in a massive multi-year fraud lawsuit and face the indefinite suspension of their entire data center project. I hovered my finger over the mouse, looked at Marcus, who gave me a confident nod, and clicked send. A soft chime echoed in the quiet office. The bullet had officially left the chamber. The fallout happened faster than either of us could have predicted. For a massive tech conglomerate, legal risks involving core natural resources were an absolute deal-breaker. The Apex legal team immediately accessed the state database and verified the authenticity of my grandfather's certificate. Within minutes, they realized they had almost walked right into an elaborate multi-million-dollar fraud trap orchestrated by DeAndre. He had intentionally hidden the severance of the water rights to steal the corporate payout. At that exact moment, DeAndre was sitting comfortably in the luxurious VIP lounge on the top floor of the Apex building, sipping sparkling water and eagerly waiting to be called into the boardroom to collect his check. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors swung open. The executive chief secretary walked out, flanked by two massive, unsmiling corporate security guards. The secretary looked at DeAndre with eyes as cold as ice. She informed him that his meeting had been permanently canceled. The board of directors had absolutely zero interest in doing business with an individual attempting to commit gross asset fraud. DeAndre froze the glass of sparkling water, shaking violently in his hand. He jumped to his feet, raising his voice desperately, trying to explain that there had to be a misunderstanding and demanding to see the executives face to face. But their patience was non-existent. The two security guards took a step forward politely but firmly, forcing him out of the lounge and into the elevator. He was escorted through the bustling main lobby in front of dozens of employees and thrown out onto the street. The automatic glass doors of the Apex headquarters slid shut behind him, officially locking him out of the only salvation he had left. Bad news travels through the financial underworld faster than a lit match in a dry forest. The news of DeAndre being publicly escorted out of Apex and losing the corporate deal reached the exact people who should have never heard about it. The underground loan sharks holding the mortgage on his penthouse and the family company did not operate on promises or corporate potential. They operated on hard cash and brutal violence. When they realized their primary debtor had just lost his only means of repayment, they immediately moved to collect. Late that evening, a suffocating atmosphere of terror settled over the sprawling San Diego penthouse. Chloe was pacing across the living room, screaming at DeAndre and blaming him for the humiliating failure at the corporate office. Suddenly, a deafening crash echoed from the front entryway. It was not a polite knock. Someone was taking a solid metal baseball bat and smashing it repeatedly against the expensive custom oak door, splintering the wood and sending shards flying across the marble floor. Through the security camera monitor, DeAndre watched in absolute horror as three massive men in dark leather jackets stood in the hallway. Their faces were hardened masks of pure malice. They did not bother with pleasantries. The raspy, booming voice of the leader pierced right through the shattered door, dripping with lethal intent. "We know you are in there, DeAndre. The game of hide-and-seek is officially over. Your tech deal is completely dead. You have exactly 24 hours to produce the entire principal and the interest. If we do not see our cash by tomorrow night, we are coming inside and we are going to start repossessing your debt by taking pieces of your beautiful wife." The heavy thudding footsteps slowly retreated down the hallway, leaving behind a ruined door and an atmosphere so thick with terror it was hard to breathe. Inside the extravagant penthouse, the golden child of the family completely shattered. DeAndre slid down the wall, collapsing onto the cold marble floor, gripping his hair in absolute blinding panic. In the corner, Chloe was curled into a tight ball, sobbing hysterically, her flawless makeup running down her pale, terrified face. With trembling, sweaty hands, DeAndre pulled his phone from his pocket. He frantically dialed my number. He called me over and over again, desperately hoping to find a shred of mercy or pity from the sister he had so casually thrown away like garbage. But miles away, sitting comfortably in my quiet, secure hotel room, I just watched my phone screen light up with his name. I did not pick up. I sat in complete silence, letting the phone ring again and again until it finally went to voicemail. My silence was the most ruthless answer I could possibly give. The trap had snapped shut, the noose was completely tight, and my arrogant brother was now drowning in the very same ocean of greed he had created. Night fell over the valley, bringing with it a massive storm. The rain battered the roof of the farmhouse like thousands of sharp needles howling through the cracks of the old windows. But inside, the reality was completely different. In the kitchen, which I had already begun renovating into a warm and modern space, using a fraction of my auction funds, I sat quietly on a leather bar stool. I took a slow sip of hot chamomile tea. The room was bathed in the soft, warm glow of a new chandelier. On the marble countertop, my phone screen lit up continuously in the dim room. 40 missed calls. Every single one of them was from DeAndre. He was officially losing his mind. The feeling of being backed into a corner by the exact same sister he had treated like garbage was burning away his last remaining shreds of sanity. I did not pick up the phone. I knew exactly what a wild animal would do when trapped. The underground loan sharks had delivered their final, ruthless ultimatum, and DeAndre had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The massive corporate contract with Apex was completely dead. The only door to his salvation had been slammed shut by my hand. My absolute silence right now was the most brutal and effective psychological torture I could possibly inflict. Just as Marcus and I had predicted, around 2 o'clock in the morning, blinding headlights ripped through the pitch-black darkness of the front yard. The luxury Mercedes engine roared furiously, the tires violently sliding through the thick mud before slamming on the brakes right near the farm fence. Mud splashed aggressively against the newly reinforced wooden porch steps. The car door flew open. DeAndre leaped out into the freezing torrential rain. He was not wearing his expensive tailored suits. He did not look like the polished, untouchable business mogul he pretended to be. He was soaked to the bone, his hair plastered to his forehead, his eyes bloodshot and wide with a terrifying mixture of absolute desperation and unhinged rage. He sprinted clumsily across the muddy lawn, tripping and falling before scrambling back to his feet. He completely ignored the massive legal warning sign I had posted at the entrance. He reached the front porch and began pounding his fists violently against the heavy oak door. The sound echoed through the entire house, competing with the thunder. "Kiara, open this door right now!" His voice was hoarse and cracking, completely swallowed by the storm. "What do you think you are doing? Do you honestly believe some ancient piece of paper gives you the right to take everything away from me? Mom and Dad gave me everything. This entire estate belongs to me. You have absolutely no right. Give me that water certificate right now. You are killing me, Kiara. Open the door." He continued to hammer his fists against the wood, screaming toxic insults mixed with sheer panic. He blamed me for his pathetic downfall. He blamed me for ruining his life-saving deal with Apex. In his sick, narcissistic mind, I was still just a lowly servant, the scapegoat sister, whose only purpose was to sacrifice herself to clean up his massive messes. I did not walk over to unlock the door. Instead, I calmly reached for the high-definition security tablet I had installed just yesterday. The glowing screen displayed my golden child brother acting like a lunatic in the rain. I pressed my finger against the intercom button, connecting to the external speaker mounted above the porch. My voice projected out into the storm, perfectly steady, chilling, and sharp as a blade. "You are being entirely too loud, DeAndre." I spoke slowly, stripping every ounce of sympathy from my tone. "Mom and Dad left you the luxury penthouse and the entire family company, but the water rights were left exclusively to me by Grandpa Earl. You sold our family honor, and you mortgaged everything to fund your fake shallow lifestyle. Do not stand on my porch and blame me for your own profound stupidity." DeAndre froze for a fraction of a second when my voice echoed from the speaker above his head. His face contorted in sheer terror. Then he threw himself against the door again, his tone instantly shifting from aggressive demands to pathetic, desperate begging. "You have to save me. Those men are going to kill me and Chloe. Do you have any idea what those loan sharks do to people? They are not messing around, Kiara. They are going to cut off my wife's fingers. Just slide that paper under the door. Apex will wire the funds tomorrow. I will give you $1 million. No $2 million. All in cash. Kiara, please. I am your own flesh and blood. You lost the right to negotiate with me," I replied clearly, cutting right through his pathetic lies. "My kindness died the night you and your wife threw me out into the street at 4 in the morning. And more importantly, you are currently violating a Supreme Court restraining order. You are trespassing on my property." "What are you talking about? Are you really going to call the cops on your own brother?" he screamed, his voice shattering into a pathetic sob. "You are completely cold-blooded. You are a monster." "I am just taking the trash out of my house exactly like you told me to do," I replied coldly, lifting my finger from the intercom button. Right at that exact moment, the piercing wail of county police sirens began echoing from the distant highway. Flashing red and blue lights pierced the heavy curtain of rain speeding aggressively toward the farm. My automated security system had instantly dispatched a rapid response unit the second he breached the property line. DeAndre whipped his head around, staring in absolute horror at the approaching lights. The last drop of color drained from his face. If he was arrested right now, he would not only face jail time for violating a judge's order, but he would be locked behind bars while the ruthless loan sharks went straight to his penthouse to collect their debt from his wife. His survival instinct completely overpowered his remaining arrogance. He muttered a weak string of curses, turned around, and sprinted back to his car like an absolute coward. The tires spun wildly, throwing thick chunks of mud into the air as the Mercedes sped off into the dark night, narrowly escaping just before the police cruisers pulled up to the gate. I turned off the security monitor, smiled, and took another sip of my tea. The arrogant hunter had officially become a pathetic cornered prey, but my punishment was not going to stop at simply scaring him away in the rain. I wanted to completely obliterate the very foundation of his ego. The next morning, while DeAndre and Chloe were barricaded inside their penthouse, trembling at every shadow and waiting for the gangsters to break their door down, an expedited courier arrived. He handed them a thick legal parcel sent directly from Marcus's law firm. Inside the envelope was not a letter checking on his well-being. It was a formal, legally binding real estate purchase offer. The terms laid out in the document were incredibly brief, but carried a devastating psychological blow that would shatter whatever hope they had left. The document read clearly, "Representing our client, Ms. Kiara, we recognize that you are currently experiencing severe liquidity issues and face imminent asset seizure from hostile third parties. Our client is willing to purchase the San Diego penthouse property in an all-cash transaction today to assist you in satisfying your unofficial creditors. The buyout offer is strictly set at $300,000. $300,000 for a luxury San Diego penthouse that was easily worth over $2 million on the open market. This was not a business negotiation. It was the ultimate insult. It was a vicious slap to the face of the golden child. I was throwing him a cheap bone, treating him with the exact same disrespect he showed me when he offered $50,000 to steal my multi-million-dollar water rights. Now he was forced to make the most agonizing decision of his entire life. He could swallow his pride, sell his prized luxury home for absolute pennies to the sister he despised just to save his own life. Or he could stubbornly cling to his fake billionaire persona and wait for the loan sharks to arrive and break every bone in his body. I placed my empty teacup in the sink and walked over to the kitchen window. The violent storm had completely passed, leaving behind a brilliant golden morning sun that illuminated the entire valley. This land belonged to me, and no one could ever take it away. I held the power of life and death over my brother's future, and the best part of this performance was still yet to come. The camera lens pans slowly from right to left, capturing me sitting comfortably on the armchair in my living room. I slowly lifted my cup of chamomile tea and took a small sip, savoring the sweet flavor and the rare peace after days of storms. The quiet space of the farm now belonged entirely to me. The chaos, the fear, and the frantic screams were nothing more than echoes from a pathetic world my brother was currently enduring. Right at that moment, the security alarm at the main gate let out a short beep. I glanced at the tablet screen resting on the table. It was not DeAndre's roaring supercar. It was a cheap rideshare taxi dropping a passenger off in front of my farm. The person stepping out of the car was Chloe. She was no longer draped in expensive designer clothes or strutting with the arrogant posture of a high society wife. Chloe was wearing a plain light gray overcoat, and her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was messy, falling loose to hide half of her pale face. Most noticeably, she was clutching something that looked like a large book tightly against her chest. I pressed the remote gate release, allowing her to step onto my property. I wanted to see what kind of performance this woman was planning to put on today. A few minutes later, a hesitant, weak knock sounded at the door, completely contradicting her aggressive behavior at the church. I walked over and opened the door. Chloe stood there, her eyes puffy and bloodshot, as if she had just survived a hysterical crying fit. She trembled, holding the object close to her heart, and I recognized it as the old family photo album my mother used to keep in the glass cabinet at the penthouse. "Kiara," she spoke in a timid, sobbing, and weak voice. "Can I come inside? I really need to talk to you. Just the two of us." I smirked, showing absolutely no welcoming emotion, but I took a step back and nodded for her to enter. Chloe walked into the living room, her eyes darting around, absorbing the changes to the house with an astonishment she could not hide. She nervously sat on the edge of the brand-new leather sofa and carefully placed the photo album on the glass coffee table. "You have such a wonderful space here," Chloe began, trying to force a stiff, incredibly flattering smile. "I remember Grandpa Earl used to love this place. I brought this album for you. I thought you should be the one to keep it, since you always appreciated the historical value of our family. Look, Kiara, here is a picture of you and DeAndre at Thanksgiving 10 years ago. You two used to be so close." She turned the yellowed pages of the album, and crocodile tears began to roll down her lightly made-up cheeks in a pathetic attempt to garner sympathy. I crossed my arms over my chest, leaned my back against the wall, and coldly observed the miserable performance. "Did you come all the way out here just to bring me an old photo album, Chloe?" I spoke in a flat tone, shattering the fake atmosphere she was desperately trying to build. Chloe immediately slammed the album shut, looking up at me with eyes full of absolute desperation. "No, Kiara, I came here to beg you. I cannot take it for another second. Everything is falling apart. Those gangsters, they smashed the door and threatened to kill me. DeAndre has gone completely insane. He is no longer the man I married. He lied to me, he hid his massive debts, and he dragged me into this filthy mess." She took a step forward, trying to reach out and grab my hands, but I coldly stepped back. "Kiara, you have to believe me," she sobbed. "I never wanted to treat you badly. It was all DeAndre forcing me. He poisoned my mind with lies about you telling me you were a selfish daughter who only wanted to drain the family money. I was completely manipulated by him. I always thought of you as my own sister. Please, Kiara, you have already won. You have tens of millions of dollars. Please just give me a small amount of money, just a few $100,000 so I can divorce DeAndre, buy a plane ticket out of this city and start my life over. I promise I will disappear and never bother you again." Her desperate pleas echoed pathetically in the quiet room. A proud woman who was once willing to trample on others was now selling out her own husband just to secure a safe escape. She actually thought that invoking fake family ties and playing the weak victim would manipulate my empathy. She thought I was still the naive, vulnerable little sister desperate for family affection. I laughed. My laughter did not hold an ounce of bitterness. It was pure, absolute mockery. I shook my head slowly, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out my smartphone. "That is a truly touching story, Chloe," I said, my sharp eyes piercing right through her increasingly pale face. "You are a tragic victim, manipulated by your husband. You always loved me like a real sister." "That is absolutely wonderful, but it seems your memory is not working very well. My memory operates in a completely different way. Thanks to my professional habits as an archivist, I never throw away important historical evidence." I unlocked my phone screen, swiped to the audio file I had carefully saved in a secure folder, and pressed play. The smart speaker system in the living room immediately amplified the sound, blasting sharp, piercing, and profoundly insulting words into the room. "You are 31 years old, Kiara, and you are nothing but a glorified librarian. You are a leech. This penthouse belongs to us now. Pick up your useless historical junk and get out of my house." The audio recording ended with the loud crash of shattering glass as she violently threw my framed graduation photo onto the floor. Absolute silence consumed the room. The air turned freezing cold. Chloe's face froze entirely, her eyes bulging, the pupils clouding over with ultimate humiliation and sheer terror. Her pathetic victim mask had been ruthlessly ripped away, exposing her incredibly selfish, rotten, and opportunistic true nature. Her mouth fell open, but absolutely no excuses could escape her throat. "You see, Chloe?" I continued, taking slow, deliberate steps toward her, my voice dropping into a deep, authoritative tone. "That night, when you humiliated me and threw me out into a violent storm, you were not being manipulated. You enjoyed every single second of trampling on me. You were thrilled to see me lose everything. And now, when the ship you and DeAndre are on is sinking to the bottom of the ocean, you want me to throw you a life preserver using my own money." I stopped right in front of her, unblinking, radiating the absolute authority of the person controlling the game. "Take this piece of trash photo album and leave," I commanded, pointing my finger directly at the front door. "Your family affection is so cheap and fake it makes me sick to my stomach. I am not your charitable bank. But out of respect for the grandfather who actually loved this family, I will give you one final way out." Chloe trembled violently, clutching the album as she took slow steps backward toward the door, too terrified to even look me in the eye. "Listen to me very carefully, Chloe. Monday morning at exactly 10 o'clock, bring your husband to Marcus's law office. Make sure DeAndre signs every single document surrendering the property dispute and handing over total control of the penthouse for the $300,000 I offered. No negotiations, no conditions. If you sign the papers like good little dogs, I will let you have enough money to pay off the loan sharks and keep your miserable lives. Otherwise, you two can start picking out your own coffins." I pulled the front door wide open. "Now get out of my house." Chloe did not dare whisper a single word. She scrambled out the door, her clumsy feet tripping over the wooden steps, but she frantically pulled herself up and sprinted toward the front gate to call her taxi. I stood there, my arms crossed over my chest, watching her pathetic silhouette disappear down the road. The noose was pulled completely tight. The people who once considered themselves the arrogant elite were now nothing more than cheap puppets flailing in total despair. The game was almost over, and I was the one about to sweep the board clean. The frame remains perfectly still for a few seconds, just long enough to take a deep, grounding breath after the relentless psychological storms. Then the perspective slowly pushes forward, bringing the vast open expanse of the valley back into focus. By the end of that weekend, the entire landscape of the farm had undergone a breathtaking transformation. The long days of silent, relentless grinding and meticulous preparation in the dark had finally blossomed into a brilliant reality. The rotting, gloomy atmosphere of the abandoned property was completely gone. The trash, splintered wood, and shattered drywall caused by the violent storm had been entirely cleared away by the professional construction crews I had hired with my auction funds. The fragile old wooden house was now securely reinforced with heavy-duty steel support beams. But what would make anyone driving down the highway stop and stare was not the freshly cleared yard. It was the impenetrable security perimeter now surrounding the property. The rotting wooden fence, once overgrown with dead weeds, had been entirely replaced by a fortified high-tech security barrier. Most impressively, 3 massive armored black SUVs with corporate license plates were parked strategically along the edges of the land. Huge security contractors dressed in tactical black uniforms, equipped with two-way radios and projecting a cold professional authority, patrolled the boundaries around the clock. Even though Apex Data Solutions had not officially signed the final $25 million contract for the priceless water rights, they were not taking any chances. They had quietly dispatched their most elite corporate security team to protect their massive future investment from any potential sabotage. I was no longer a weak, isolated girl shivering in a leaking house in the middle of a rainstorm. I was standing right in the center of an impenetrable fortress, shielded by the absolute wealth and power of the tech industry. Late afternoon descended, painting the entire Central Valley sky in brilliant, tragic shades of fiery orange and deep crimson. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows across the freshly cut grass. I wore a simple dark knit cardigan and walked slowly across the lawn, making my way toward a small hill hidden just behind the main house. Standing proudly at the top of that hill was a giant ancient oak tree. Its massive roots dug deep into the earth like a resilient historical witness that had survived decades of harsh seasons. Resting quietly beneath the shade of those heavy branches was a simple but incredibly sturdy marble headstone. It was the final resting place of Grandpa Earl. I stopped in front of the headstone, carefully kneeling on one knee into the soft grass, and gently laid down a bouquet of pure white lilies I had cut myself that morning. It was the exact flower he used to love when he was alive. A gentle breeze swept through the valley, caressing my hair and carrying the familiar, comforting scent of damp earth and dry autumn leaves. I closed my eyes, allowing the powerful childhood memories to flood my mind. Grandpa Earl's image appeared incredibly vivid. I saw a tall black man with heavily calloused hands from years of grueling labor. His weathered face lined with the heavy wrinkles of time, but his eyes always burning with an unquenchable, fierce pride. He had dedicated his entire life facing unimaginable, ruthless discrimination and the unjust barriers of American society during those turbulent decades just to purchase and hold on to every single inch of this soil. He had fought against a deeply racist banking system. He had fought against greedy land brokers who constantly tried to swindle black families out of their property. His deep, warm voice, rumbling like distant thunder, seemed to whisper through the quiet evening air, echoing straight into the deepest part of my soul. Land is freedom for black people, my sweet granddaughter, he used to tell me as we sat on the porch. It is not just a place to grow crops or build a house. It is the only thing in this world that proves we truly exist, that we have a permanent voice, and that we are the masters of our own lives. Once you own the dirt beneath your feet, no man can ever tell you where to go or what to do. Do not ever let anyone steal it from you. I opened my eyes. The sharp, unwavering gaze staring at the marble stone was as cold and precise as a freshly sharpened blade. The weak tears that had threatened to form at the corners of my eyes completely evaporated, replaced by a roaring, inextinguishable fire of determination. My parents had been incredibly ungrateful and short-sighted when they dismissed this land. They only cared about flashy country club dinners in the city and treated my grandfather's farm like an embarrassing rural stain that needed to be hidden away. And my brother, the spoiled golden child who was handed everything on a silver platter, had actually dared to try and sell this blood-soaked legacy for a pathetic $50,000 just to save his fragile ego and his cheap, flashy lifestyle. They did not just trample on my dignity when they threw me out into the street at 4 in the morning. They had ruthlessly trampled on the sweat, the tears, and the literal blood of the generation that came before them. Tomorrow's battle at the downtown law office was no longer just about petty personal revenge for a betrayed sister. It was vastly bigger than that. It was a necessary absolute purge to restore order to my universe. I was going to reclaim justice. I was going to reclaim the honor that was stolen from my grandfather and permanently cement my own power. I was going to personally crush the toxic ideology of favoritism that had fed my brother's endless greed. I was going to prove to my remaining family, and to the entire world, that this land, the massive subterranean ocean beneath it, and the resilient, unyielding blood running furiously through my veins, were priceless treasures that could never be bought with lies or cheap threats. Right at that profound moment, a short, sharp vibration from the phone, buried deep in my coat pocket, pulled me back to reality. I pulled it out. The screen lit up with a pale blue glow contrasting sharply with the darkening twilight sky. A brief text message carrying the weight of a nuclear bomb had just been delivered from Marcus on his secure line. All legal procedures are perfectly set for the 10 o'clock negotiation tomorrow morning. The message read clearly. The underground lenders have completely run out of patience. The bank just officially issued the foreclosure notice for DeAndre's penthouse and permanently froze every single account tied to the family logistics company. He is completely cornered and has absolutely no way out except to get on his knees in front of you. I read those exact words twice to fully absorb the absolute victory that was mere hours away. I locked the phone screen and slowly slipped the device back into my pocket. The evening wind began to blow a little harder, catching the dry oak leaves and sending them spiraling through the air before they settled onto the grass. I looked at Grandpa Earl's stone one last time, reaching out to gently trace the engraved letters of his name. I smiled. It was a cold, incredibly proud, and profoundly satisfied smile. Tomorrow morning, the fake empire built on a foundation of lies and toxic favoritism would officially shatter into a million unfixable pieces, and the crown of true power would finally be returned to its rightful place. Tonight was going to be the longest, most terrifying night of my brother's pathetic life, but for me, it would be the most peaceful sleep I had ever known. Monday morning arrived crisp and clear. If a camera were capturing this exact moment, it would be positioned at a low angle pointing upward from the polished concrete sidewalk to capture my determined stride as I approached the towering glass and steel skyscraper in the heart of the downtown financial district. The morning sun reflected brilliantly off the massive glass facade framing me against the bright blue California sky. I was not wearing the cheap gray cotton dress they had mocked at the church. I was wearing a sharp, custom-tailored emerald green power suit that commanded absolute attention and radiated total control. My designer heels clicked rhythmically and powerfully against the flawless marble floor of the grand corporate lobby. Just a little over a week ago, I was dragging a broken vintage suitcase through thick mud in the middle of a freezing rainstorm, thrown out of my own family home like a piece of worthless trash. Today I was walking into the epicenter of corporate wealth as a multimillionaire fully prepared to execute the final devastating phase of my absolute victory. I stepped into the private glass elevator, watching the sprawling city shrink beneath my feet as I ascended to the top floor, where Marcus had reserved the most exclusive executive boardroom in the entire building. When I pushed open the heavy mahogany double doors, I found DeAndre and Chloe already sitting on the opposite side of the massive polished conference table. The panoramic windows behind them offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, but the atmosphere inside the room was incredibly suffocating. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Despite the absolute terrifying fact that their entire financial and personal world was crumbling into dust, they were both dressed to the nines. They were wearing their very last pieces of high-end designer clothing, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of power. DeAndre wore a pristine navy blue Tom Ford suit, his silk tie perfectly knotted and his diamond Rolex carefully positioned on his wrist to catch the overhead lights. Chloe was wearing a classic Chanel tweed blazer and her massive diamond wedding ring. She was sitting rigidly in her leather chair with her chin held high. They were desperately trying to project the image of the wealthy, untouchable elite, hoping they could somehow intimidate me into submission one last time. But the facade was cracking. I could see the faint sheen of nervous sweat glistening on DeAndre's forehead. I could see the way Chloe's perfectly manicured fingers were trembling slightly as she clutched her expensive leather handbag resting on her lap. Their arrogant posture was nothing more than a hollow shell, hiding their sheer, unadulterated terror. When I walked into the room, DeAndre let out a loud, patronizing sigh, leaning back in his expensive leather chair and steepling his fingers together. He did not look at me with the panic he had shown in the rain, nor the desperation he must have felt when his bank accounts were frozen. He was reverting to his default setting of arrogant, condescending superiority. It was the only defense mechanism he had left. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a single piece of paper and tossed it casually across the long wooden table. It fluttered through the cold air conditioning and landed precisely on the polished wood, right where I was meant to sit. I stopped at the head of the table and glanced down at the paper. It was a certified cashier's check made out to me. The amount written across the line was exactly $50,000. Kiara let us stop playing these ridiculous emotional childhood games, DeAndre said. He put on his best authoritative voice, the exact tone he used to command his warehouse employees. I am offering you a very generous and highly practical exit strategy. Take the $50,000. Sign the property release forms right now, relinquishing any absurd legal claim you think you have to the farm and the water rights. You can take this money, pay off your little student loans, go back to your quiet life in the archives, and we can all pretend this embarrassing week never happened. I remained standing, my expression completely unreadable. DeAndre took my silence as a sign of hesitation and immediately leaned forward, pressing his hands flat against the table to assert his dominance. He decided to use the ultimate manipulation tactic, the one that had kept me obedient for my entire life. Mom and Dad would be so incredibly disappointed if they could see you right now, he said, his voice dripping with fake sorrow and heavy guilt. They would be absolutely heartbroken to see you fighting your own flesh and blood, trying to ruin your brother out of sheer petty jealousy. They left me in charge of this family because they knew I could handle the business. You are stepping way out of your lane and you are putting our entire family legacy at risk over a technicality. Sign the paper, Kiara. Be the bigger person for once in your life and stop trying to destroy the empire our parents built. He was using the memory of our dead parents as a weapon, trying to trigger the old, paralyzing guilt that used to control my every move. But that emotional button had been completely dismantled. I did not flinch. I did not drop my gaze. I calmly reached out, pulled the heavy leather chair back, and sat down with slow, elegant precision. I crossed my legs, rested my hands lightly on the mahogany surface, and looked directly into his condescending, bloodshot eyes. I did not say a word about our parents. I simply placed my index finger on the edge of his $50,000 check. With one smooth, deliberate motion, I slid the piece of paper all the way back across the long table. It glided over the polished wood and stopped directly in front of his folded hands. You are fundamentally mistaken about why we are here today, brother, I said. My voice was completely smooth, steady, and devoid of any emotional vulnerability. I did not call you to this office so I could sign my multi-million-dollar inheritance away for your pathetic pocket change. I called you here so you could sign your life away to me. DeAndre's fake, confident smile instantly vanished from his face. The illusion of the calm, collected businessman shattered completely. His face flushed a dark, furious red, the veins bulging visibly against his neck. He slammed his fists down hard on the table, the sudden noise echoing sharply in the quiet room. Chloe jumped in her seat, letting out a small, terrified gasp. "How dare you speak to me like that?" DeAndre roared, preparing to launch into a vicious screaming tantrum to forcefully regain control of the narrative. "You think you are so smart. You think you have me cornered with your little lawyer tricks. You have absolutely nothing. I am the executor of this estate. I am the head of this family. I will tie you up in court for the next 20 years until you are begging me for $1. But before he could finish his desperate hollow shouting, the heavy double doors of the boardroom swung wide open. The sudden sharp sound sucked the air completely out of the room. DeAndre froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open as he turned his head to see who dared to interrupt his meeting. Marcus walked in looking incredibly sharp, confident, and highly dangerous in his tailored dark suit. He carried a thick stack of legal binders under his arm. But my brilliant, ruthless lawyer did not come into the room alone. Walking closely behind Marcus were two older, distinguished men whose presence made DeAndre's blood run completely cold. The first man was wearing a sharp gray suit, his face set in a furious, unforgiving scowl. It was the chief executive officer of Apex Data Solutions, the exact corporate giant DeAndre had arrogantly tried to defraud just a few days prior. The second man carried a sleek leather briefcase and wore a look of clinical detached precision. He was the senior asset recovery director from the massive financial institution that currently held the defaulted mortgages on DeAndre's penthouse and the family logistics company. The absolute true masters of DeAndre's financial fate had just entered the room, and as they took their seats, they were all sitting firmly on my side of the table. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, sealing the room like a vault. The brilliant, glaring fluorescent lights overhead seemed to intensify, casting harsh, unforgiving shadows across DeAndre's face. The atmosphere in the boardroom shifted instantly from corporate arrogance to the chilling reality of a public execution. The men who held the absolute power over DeAndre's life did not look at him with respect. They looked at him like he was a diseased animal that had wandered into their pristine environment. Marcus unbuttoned his suit jacket, took his seat directly to my right, and calmly placed his thick leather briefcase onto the polished table. The loud snap of the metal latches echoed through the dead silence of the room. He did not waste a single second on pleasantries. "Allow me to introduce the new reality of your situation," Marcus said, his voice projecting with the smooth, lethal authority of a seasoned prosecutor. Marcus pulled a massive, professionally bound legal document from his briefcase and slid it to the center of the table. The gold foil seal of the state of California gleamed under the bright lights. "This is a fully executed, legally binding contract between my client, Ms. Chiara, and Apex Data Solutions," Marcus announced, gesturing toward the CEO sitting beside him. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, Apex has officially purchased the exclusive perpetual commercial usage rights to the subterranean water aquifer beneath the farm, along with a structured lease for the surface land required for their server facilities. The total value of this transaction is exactly $25 million. DeAndre's jaw dropped. His eyes darted frantically from the thick contract to the stern face of the Apex CEO. He aggressively gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning stark white. "You cannot do that," DeAndre stammered, his voice cracking violently. "That surface land is part of the family estate. I am the executor. Apex cannot build on that dirt without my authorized signature. This is illegal." The Apex CEO leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. His expression was a mask of pure corporate disgust. "We do not do business with frauds," DeAndre, the CEO, said, his voice cold and flat. "When your sister's legal team informed us of the severed water rights, our investigators dug into your portfolio. We discovered that you intentionally attempted to deceive a publicly traded company to secure a fraudulent deposit. You possess absolutely no leverage. Your sister, however, controls the only resource we actually need. With her massive capital, she legally forced a buyout of your remaining surface land shares through the probate court early this morning. You own nothing in that valley anymore. You are completely irrelevant to our operations. DeAndre gasped as if he had been physically punched in the stomach. He slumped back into his chair, the last remaining color draining entirely from his face. But the barrage of destruction was far from over. I sat perfectly still, watching him suffocate, waiting for the second devastating blow to land. The senior asset recovery director from the bank cleared his throat, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He opened his sleek black folder and extracted a stack of financial records, bank statements, and terrifyingly clear photographic evidence. Mr. DeAndre, the banking director, began, his tone entirely robotic and detached. Our financial institution holds the primary mortgages on both your corporate logistics company and your luxury penthouse in San Diego. The terms of those multi-million-dollar loans explicitly prohibit leveraging those assets against secondary unregulated debt. The director slid a photograph across the table. It was a crystal-clear security image of the three massive leather jacket-clad loan sharks violently smashing DeAndre's front door with a baseball bat. It has come to our immediate attention that you have engaged with highly dangerous illicit underground lenders, the director continued smoothly. By using bank-owned properties as collateral for illegal black market loans, you have triggered an immediate and catastrophic breach of contract. You are officially classified as a critical liability to our institution. We have permanently frozen every single bank account tied to your name and your company. No, please wait. DeAndre begged, completely abandoning his arrogant facade. The panic in his voice was raw and pathetic. I can fix this. I just need a few days to liquidate some assets. You cannot freeze my accounts. I have corporate payroll. I have vendors. I have a wife to protect. The banking director ignored his desperate pleading. He reached into his folder one last time and pulled out a single bright red legal notice. He pushed it across the table until it touched DeAndre's trembling fingers. This is an expedited notice of foreclosure, the director stated firmly. Because of the extreme criminal risk associated with your secondary creditors, a federal judge has granted us immediate seizure rights to protect our financial assets. The foreclosure on your penthouse goes into full effect today at exactly 12 o'clock noon. I slowly raised my left arm, pulling back the sleeve of my emerald green suit to reveal my watch. The polished silver hands gleamed under the boardroom lights. It is currently 11:45. I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air like a razor. You have exactly 15 minutes before the county sheriffs arrive at your building to permanently lock the doors, throw all of your expensive designer clothes onto the sidewalk, and hand the property over to the bank. The absolute finality of my words hung in the air. The grand illusion was completely shattered. There was no more money. There was no more power. There was no more family company. DeAndre was utterly ruined mathematically and legally obliterated in front of the most powerful men in the city. A sudden, sharp, gasping noise broke the silence. It came from Chloe. She had been sitting frozen in her chair, her eyes wide with mounting unadulterated horror as she listened to the men systematically strip away every single ounce of her wealthy lifestyle. The realization hit her like a runaway freight train. The luxury penthouse was gone. The bank accounts were frozen. The $25 million was entirely mine. And worst of all, the ruthless, violent loan sharks who had threatened to chop off her fingers were still coming to collect their debt, and her husband had absolutely nothing left to pay them with. She snapped. Chloe leaped out of her leather chair so fast it tipped backward and crashed loudly against the panoramic glass window. She stood over DeAndre, her chest heaving, her perfectly styled hair flying wildly around her face. Her eyes were wide, manic, and filled with a venomous, hysterical rage. "You lied to me," Chloe screamed, her shrill voice echoing violently off the boardroom walls. "You promised me we were secure. You promised me you had everything handled." DeAndre looked up at his wife, his eyes filled with pathetic, trembling tears. "Chloe, baby, please calm down. I can fix this. I just need a little time to talk to my sister." "You cannot fix anything, you pathetic loser," she shrieked. entirely losing her mind. Before DeAndre could even raise his hands to defend himself, Chloe swung her arm with terrifying speed. The sound of her open palm connecting with DeAndre's cheek cracked through the room like a gunshot. The physical force of the slap was so intense that it snapped DeAndre's head violently to the side. A bright red, stinging handprint instantly bloomed across his pale skin. "You useless piece of trash!" Chloe roared, her face contorted in absolute disgust. "You said you had this bitch under control. You told me she was just a stupid librarian who would roll over and give us the land. You completely ruined my life. You brought gangsters to my front door." "Chloe, please," DeAndre sobbed, reaching out with a shaking hand to grab her designer jacket. "Do not leave me right now. We are a team. Do not touch me," she screamed violently, slapping his hand away. She furiously grabbed her left hand, digging her fingernails into her own skin as she aggressively yanked the massive, expensive diamond wedding ring off her finger. She reared back and threw the heavy piece of jewelry directly at his face. The diamond struck DeAndre square in the forehead, bounced off his nose and clattered loudly across the polished mahogany table, spinning until it came to a dead stop right in front of my folded hands. "I am done with you," Chloe spat, her voice dripping with pure concentrated hatred. "Have fun explaining to those loan sharks why you are broke and homeless." Without looking back, she grabbed her expensive leather handbag, turned on her designer heels, and sprinted toward the boardroom doors. She shoved the heavy mahogany doors open and ran down the hallway, the frantic clicking of her heels fading rapidly into the distance as she abandoned her husband to face his absolute destruction completely alone. I sat perfectly still, my expression calm, and completely unmoved by the violent emotional explosion that had just taken place. I looked down at the glittering diamond ring resting on the table in front of me, then slowly raised my eyes to look at the broken, weeping man sitting across from me. The arrogant king had been entirely stripped of his crown, his kingdom, and his queen. The climax was over, and the complete devastating reality of his consequences had finally arrived. The heavy mahogany double doors clicked shut again after Chloe's frantic departure, leaving a ringing silence in her wake. If a camera were capturing this scene, it would push in for a tight, unforgiving close-up on DeAndre. He sat frozen for a few agonizing seconds, staring at the empty doorway where his wife had just vanished. Then, as the immense gravity of his situation finally crushed the last pillar of his reality, he physically collapsed. His elbows hit the polished wood of the conference table, his face burying into his hands as a guttural, pathetic sob ripped from his throat. The Apex CEO and the bank director had seen enough. They were men of business, and they did not deal in emotional family drama or the messy fallout of a shattered ego. They quietly gathered their documents, snapped their sleek briefcases shut, and stood up in unison. Without offering a single word of sympathy or a backward glance, the two powerful executives walked out of the boardroom. Marcus remained seated to my right, leaning back in his chair, watching the spectacle with the cold, detached satisfaction of a lawyer who had just delivered the flawless execution of a perfect trap. DeAndre was completely unraveled. The polished, arrogant billionaire facade had melted away completely, leaving behind a terrified, broken man who finally understood that his actions had irreversible consequences. He violently pushed his chair back and fell heavily onto his knees. The expensive fabric of his custom navy suit dragged across the carpet as he scrambled around the edge of the massive table, crawling directly toward where I sat. He reached out with trembling, sweaty hands and desperately grabbed the hem of my emerald green suit jacket. His knuckles were white, his grip frantic and unyielding. "Kiara, please," he wailed, his voice thick with tears and absolute terror. He looked up at me, his face red and completely distorted by panic. "You have to help me. You have $25 million now. You have all the power. Please, I am begging you on my hands and knees. They are going to kill me. Those underground men do not care about the bank or the property foreclosures. If I do not have their cash by tonight, they are going to drag me into an alley and chop me into pieces. You cannot let your own flesh and blood die like this. Mom and Dad would never forgive you. Please, sister, just pay them off." Save my life. I did not pull away immediately. I sat perfectly still in my heavy leather chair and looked down at the golden child of our family. I looked at the boy who had been handed the entire world on a silver platter, only to burn it all to the ground out of sheer, unadulterated greed and vanity. His tears stained the pristine boardroom carpet. His desperate, sweaty grip wrinkled my tailored jacket. I searched within myself, looking for even a fraction of the toxic family loyalty that had chained me down and forced me to be the sacrificial lamb for 31 years. I found absolutely nothing. No pity, no guilt, no mercy. I slowly leaned forward in my chair. I reached down and firmly grabbed his wrists. With a calm, terrifying strength that he had never seen from me before, I pried his fingers off my clothing one by one. I pushed his hands away with absolute finality, letting him slump fully onto the floor at my feet. I leaned down so my face was only inches from his weeping, terrified eyes. "Do you remember the storm, DeAndre?" I asked. My voice was completely steady, barely above a whisper, yet it echoed like roaring thunder in the quiet room. "Do you remember standing in the dry, warm hallway of your luxury penthouse at 4 o'clock in the morning, watching the freezing rain pour down outside? Do you remember looking at me with pure disgust while I dragged a broken suitcase toward the door because you wanted to impress your shallow wife?" DeAndre let out a choked, agonizing gasp, violently shaking his head, as if he could somehow erase the memory of his own cruelty. "You told me I was nothing but a useless, pathetic leech." I continued, my tone entirely devoid of any human warmth. "You told me to take my garbage and go back to exactly where I belong. And you know what, brother? I listened to you. I did exactly what you commanded. I went back to Grandpa Earl's land, and I realized that you were absolutely right. That is exactly where I belong. That massive farm, that subterranean ocean, and that $25 million tech contract belong entirely to me." I slowly stood up, towering over his trembling form. I casually smoothed out the wrinkles on my emerald suit jacket, restoring my flawless appearance. "I found where I belong, DeAndre. But the freezing rain, the empty pockets, and the ruthless, violent streets waiting for you outside this building?" I said, gesturing toward the panoramic window overlooking the sprawling city below. "Those belong entirely to you." I turned my back on him. I picked up my designer handbag from the table and gave Marcus a brief, highly satisfied nod. My lawyer smiled, a razor-sharp smile, picked up his leather briefcase and followed my lead. I walked toward the heavy mahogany doors, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm against the floorboards. Behind me, DeAndre let out a high-pitched, animalistic scream of pure, absolute despair. It was the sound of a man whose soul was being ripped apart by his own catastrophic failures. He thrashed against the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, as he lay next to the bright red bank foreclosure notice, Chloe's discarded diamond wedding ring, and his pathetic $50,000 cashier's check. I did not pause. I did not look back. I pushed the double doors open and stepped out into the bright, sunlit corporate hallway, breathing in the crisp, clean air of my new reality. I left the golden child trapped in that room to drown in the dark, terrifying abyss of his own making. The glaring, sterile light of that downtown corporate hallway slowly fades away. If a camera were filming this final scene, it would slowly pull back, retreating from the ghosts of that chaotic week and transitioning smoothly into the warm, golden glow of the present day. The lens widens to reveal my current reality. I am sitting comfortably in the expansive, sunlit living room of a stunning modern estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The roaring stone fireplace casts a comforting warmth across the room, illuminating walls adorned with magnificent curated art. I bought this magnificent property outright, using a fraction of the $25 million Apex settlement. I am no longer the exhausted, overlooked archivist shivering in a decaying farmhouse. I am entirely free, radiant, and completely at peace. The dust from that explosive Monday morning eventually settled, leaving a completely altered landscape in its wake. The aftermath for my brother was exactly as brutal as I had promised. The bank seized the San Diego penthouse and liquidated the family logistics company within a matter of days. but the loss of his corporate empire was the least of his problems. The underground loan sharks did not care about his tears or his apologies. Stripped of his wealth and his golden child status, DeAndre was forced to completely vanish into the shadows to escape their violent collection methods. Today, the former self-proclaimed business genius spends his days working grueling, backbreaking shifts as a manual dock worker at a commercial shipping port under a fake name. He spends every waking hour hauling heavy, freezing cargo crates, constantly looking over his shoulder, terrified of the day his creditors finally track him down to collect their pound of flesh. Chloe did not fare much better. After abandoning her husband in the boardroom and leaving her diamond ring on the table, she frantically tried to secure her survival using the only method she knew. She quickly attached herself to an older, seemingly wealthy foreign investor, hoping to seamlessly transition to a new life of luxury. Unfortunately for her, the universe has a brilliant sense of poetic justice. The older gentleman was a professional con artist. Within 6 months, he had completely drained the secret offshore accounts where Chloe had hidden her last remaining cash, pawned her remaining designer jewelry, and vanished into thin air. The last I heard, the arrogant woman who once threw a cup of grape juice at me in a church was sleeping on a worn-out couch in a cramped apartment, working double shifts at a cheap retail store just to afford basic groceries. While they drown in the miserable consequences of their own toxic greed, I chose to build something meaningful. I did not just use my newfound wealth to buy a beautiful home and isolate myself from the world. I took a massive portion of the Apex contract money and officially established the Earl's Legacy Foundation. It is a fully funded perpetual scholarship program designed exclusively for brilliant Black students pursuing degrees in history, archival sciences, and African American studies. My parents spent their entire lives trying to erase our history to fit into high society. My brother tried to sell it for a cheap payout, but I made absolutely sure that Grandpa Earl's true legacy will live on forever, empowering the next generation to protect our stories, our land, and our unyielding freedom. I stand in my beautiful home today, knowing that my grandfather is looking down with absolute, boundless pride. Toxic parental favoritism is a dangerous, destructive force. It creates a completely false reality. My parents' endless pampering and blind favoritism created a greedy, fragile monster who believed the world owed him everything. But their absolute cruelty, their neglect, and their constant rejection did not destroy me. It forged me in the fire. It hardened my resolve, sharpened my mind, and ultimately forged me into a queen who knew exactly how to claim her throne. So I want to hear from all of you. Have you ever had to step in and clean up the massive toxic mess left behind by the golden child of your family? Have you ever been pushed to the absolute breaking point by relatives who underestimated your strength? Tell Kiara your story down in the comments section below. Do not forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a video. Thank you so much for listening to my journey, and I will see you all in the next story.